At the will reading, my parents didn't even look at me. The lawyer opened the folder, and instead of my name, he read my brother over and over again. House, land, money, everything. Then my mother finally turned to me and said, "You don't need any of this. You were never really part of this family anyway." The whole room laughed except me. That was the moment I swore. If they thought they could erase me, they had no idea what storm I was about to bring. The laughter still echoed in my ears long after the lawyer closed his folder. I sat frozen, my back straight, my hands gripping the wooden chair as if I could anchor myself to something solid. My brother leaned back, smirking like he'd just won a game he didn't even have to play. The others clapped him on the back, congratulating him as though inheriting everything had been an accomplishment. I felt invisible, like a ghost wandering through the ruins of a family I once believed was mine. My father's voice broke through the haze. "Consider this your lesson," he murmured, not loud enough for the room to hear but sharp enough for me to feel it like a blade. "Survival is for the strong, and you, darling, were never strong enough." His lips curled, satisfied with the cruelty. I wanted to scream, to claw back every lie, every stolen moment with my grandfather, every story they twisted about me. But my throat tightened, the words caged inside, and I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I walked out of that room with my head high, though inside I was shattering. The heavy oak doors closed behind me, muffling their laughter, their voices, their victory. Outside, the air was cold, biting against my skin, yet it grounded me. I stood on the courthouse steps, staring at the sky. My grandfather once told me that storms never apologize for their destruction. They simply arrive, rearrange everything, and leave behind a world that will never look the same. That day, I decided I would be the storm. Driving away, the city blurred around me. Every red light felt like an eternity, every pedestrian like a reminder that life moved on, uncaring about my grief. But my grief wasn't quiet, it was fire. I replayed the scene again and again. My mother's cold eyes, my father's sneer, my brother's smug grin. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't even about the estate. It was about what they said, what they'd always implied, that I didn't belong, that I was disposable. That lie had followed me since childhood, whispered in cutting remarks, in birthday presents that never came, in the empty seats at every recital or award ceremony. When I finally reached my apartment, I collapsed onto the couch. Silence was deafening. I stared at the ceiling, remembering my grandfather's hand on my shoulder when I was 10. He had leaned down, his voice soft but firm, and said, "Never let anyone tell you that you're less. You were meant for more, even if they don't see it yet." Tears welled in my eyes, hot and relentless. They, stolen his words, twisted his memory, and now they wanted to erase me completely. But his voice still lived in me, and I clung to it like a lifeline. That night, I didn't sleep. I wandered my small apartment, touching the objects that still tied me to him. The old pocket watch he once let me hold, a faded photograph of us on the porch, a pressed magnolia leaf I'd saved from his garden. These things were worthless to the world, but to me, they were proof. Proof that I had mattered to him. Proof that I had a place in his story, even if the rest of them tried to write me out. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror, my eyes bloodshot, but burning with something new. Not weakness, not despair, determination. They had made their move and they thought the game was over. But what they didn't know was that my grandfather had always trusted me with his secrets. He believed in me when no one else did. And somewhere deep down, I knew he had left something behind, something only I was meant to find. I pressed my hands against the sink, staring into my reflection. "You are not erased," I whispered. My voice cracked but steadied on the second try. "You are not erased." Saying it out loud felt like planting a flag on new ground, a piece of territory no one could steal. For the first time since that humiliating reading, I felt a spark flicker in my chest. Small, but alive. When I stepped out of my apartment, the world looked different. The streets were the same, the people the same, but my gaze had sharpened. Every face seemed like a witness, every corner like a clue. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was hunting for the truth, for the proof, for the justice that was rightfully mine. They thought they had silenced me, but silence was only the beginning. The day after the will reading, I found myself wandering aimlessly through the city. Coffee shops buzzed with laughter, children tugged at their parents' sleeves, lovers strolled hand in hand. Life moved as though nothing had happened, as though the earth hadn't shifted beneath my feet. But inside me, there was a fault line widening, threatening to swallow me whole. I couldn't shake the sound of their laughter, the cruel certainty in my father's whisper, or the dismissive tilt of my mother's chin. By afternoon, I ended up in front of the estate gates. I hadn't intended to drive there, but my hands had guided me without permission. The iron bars rose high, sharp at the top like spears, guarding the home that had once been my sanctuary. Through the spaces, I could see the lights inside glowing warm and golden, as though mocking me. My brother's car was parked in the driveway, music pulsing faintly from inside. I could almost picture him, glass of champagne in hand, celebrating what was never his to begin with. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Memories flooded me, summer afternoons in the garden with my grandfather, his laughter mingling with the hum of bees, his stories about resilience whispered under the shade of magnolia trees. He had promised me once, "This house will always be yours, no matter what happens." But now the very walls seemed to conspire against me, holding secrets I couldn't reach. The betrayal wasn't just about money or land. It was about them stealing even the promises meant to keep me safe. I parked down the road and sat there for hours, watching shadows move behind the windows. I imagined them inside, toasting to their victory, rewriting history in real time. My brother, the golden child. My mother, proud and elegant, the actress of her own script. My father, cold and calculating, pulling the strings from behind his measured silence. They believed they had won, and in some ways they had. But I had something they didn't, an iron will born of exclusion, a strength forged in years of being invisible. When the cold crept through the car windows, I finally drove away. But instead of heading home, I found myself pulling into a dark street near the lawyer's office. His name, Jonathan Hale, was etched in gold letters on the building's glass. I sat in the car, debating. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. He had looked nervous at the will reading, almost guilty. I remembered the way his eyes flicked to me then away like he knew something, and I needed to know what. I walked up the steps and rang the bell. It was late, but a light still burned in his office window. After a moment, the door opened, and there he stood, tie loosened, eyes tired but alert. "Miss Carter." He asked, surprised. "It's nearly 9 o'clock. "I know," I said quickly, "but I need to ask you something, and I think you already know what it is." He hesitated, then stepped aside. "Come in." The office smelled faintly of old books and coffee gone cold. Papers were scattered across his desk, neat piles broken by a few restless stacks. He motioned for me to sit, but I remained standing. My heart pounded, my throat dry. "Was there another letter?" I asked finally. His shoulders stiffened. The silence stretched until it felt unbearable. Then, slowly, he exhaled. "Yes," he said quietly, "there was." My stomach lurched. He turned to the filing cabinet, unlocked the bottom drawer, and pulled out a thin envelope worn at the edges. My breath caught when I saw the handwriting, blocky, neat, familiar, my grandfather. "I was instructed not to reveal this," Jonathan said carefully. "Your parents insisted. They told me it was irrelevant, but I couldn't destroy it. I suppose I knew deep down that one day you would come looking." My fingers trembled as I took the envelope. The paper was rough beneath my touch, as though it had aged years in a locked drawer. I opened it with care, and inside was a note, short but unmistakably his. "If you're reading this, it means they have tried to cut you out. Don't lose hope. There is more. Go to the bank in London. Box 318. The truth waits there." Tears blurred my vision. My grandfather had known. He had anticipated their lies, their betrayal. He had left me a breadcrumb trail, trusting I would be strong enough to follow. "Why didn't you give this to me sooner?" I whispered, my voice raw. Jonathan looked at me with weary eyes. "Because I was afraid. Your father is persuasive, but seeing you here, I realize I can't protect myself by silencing you. He doesn't own the truth, and the truth is you were never forgotten." I clutched the letter to my chest, the words searing into me like fire. For the first time in years, I felt something close to hope. The night I held that letter in my hands, sleep was impossible. I sat at my small kitchen table with the envelope spread out in front of me, reading and rereading the words until I could recite them from memory. "Go to the bank in London. Box 318. The truth waits there." It wasn't just an instruction, it was a lifeline. My grandfather had known what would happen. He had anticipated their cruelty, their lies. And he had trusted me enough to leave behind a secret only I could uncover. Every creak of the apartment felt louder than usual, like the walls were leaning in to listen. I paced the floor, restless energy burning through me. My parents had stolen so much already: time, love, dignity. But they hadn't stolen this. Not yet. At dawn, I packed a small bag. A change of clothes, my passport, the letter. I hesitated over the pocket watch he'd once given me, tucked in a velvet pouch inside my drawer. Finally, I slipped it into my coat pocket. It felt like carrying a piece of him with me, like he was walking beside me through whatever lay ahead. The train ride to London was long, but I barely noticed the passing countryside. My mind kept drifting back to memories, fragments of conversations with him that now carried new meaning. Always pay attention to the small details, he once said when teaching me chess. They hold the key to the bigger game. Was that what this was? A game he had set in motion long before his death, knowing I would have to finish it. When the train pulled into the station, the city was alive with noise and movement. I stepped out into the chill air, clutching the strap of my bag tightly. Every sound felt sharper, every glance from a stranger more suspicious. I couldn't help but wonder if my family already knew what I was about to find. The bank was an imposing stone building on a narrow street, its brass doors polished to a blinding shine. Inside, the air smelled of leather and old paper, and the quiet was suffocating. I approached the counter, my voice steadier than I expected. "I need access to box 318, I said. "It's registered under my grandfather's name, Henry Carter." The clerk eyed me skeptically, but after checking my ID and the sealed authorization letter included in the envelope, he nodded and led me down to the vault. The corridor was lined with countless boxes, each one a mystery, a lifetime of secrets locked behind metal doors. My heart pounded as he inserted the key, swung the small door open, and slid the box onto the table. "Take your time," he said politely before leaving me alone. For a long moment, I just stared at it. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside, neatly arranged, were stacks of documents bound with twine, a small leather-bound notebook, and another envelope with my name written across it in bold, steady strokes. I reached for the notebook first. The leather was cracked, worn from use. Flipping through, I saw sketches, numbers, maps, notes about land purchases and business shares. My grandfather had cataloged everything, proof of assets, properties, accounts that hadn't been mentioned at the will reading. Assets my parents had deliberately hidden. My throat tightened. This wasn't just oversight, it was theft. Finally, I opened the envelope with my name. The letter inside was longer this time, written in his unmistakable handwriting. "My dearest Emily," it began. My vision blurred with tears at the sound of my name and his voice, alive on the page. "If you are reading this, it means the truth has been buried, but not lost. I leave you not only what is rightfully yours, but the proof of their deceit. You must be careful. They will not surrender easily. But remember, strength is not in loud battles. Strength is in persistence, in knowing who you are when the world tries to tell you otherwise. This is your fight now, but you do not fight alone. I am with you." I pressed the paper to my chest, my whole body shaking. It was as though he had reached through time, through death itself, to remind me that I was not forgotten. Beneath the letter were legal documents, deeds to land in his name, shares in the family company, and a sealed packet marked for court use. The weight of it all hit me at once. He had given me the weapons I needed. Proof, evidence, ammunition, but as I carefully repacked the box, a chill ran down my spine. If this existed, then my parents had to know it was out there, and if they knew, they wouldn't stop until they destroyed it or me. Clutching the documents to my chest, I whispered into the silence of the vault, "They think they've won, but this is only the beginning." When I stepped out of the bank into the sharp London air, I held the documents close to my chest, as if the wind itself might try to steal them. The city roared around me, buses grinding down narrow streets, vendors shouting about their wares, tourists snapping photos of buildings older than memory. But to me, it all felt distant, muted. All I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. I had something they didn't know I had. I had proof. I walked quickly, scanning the faces of strangers, half expecting one of them to be sent by my father. Paranoia crept in, but I couldn't dismiss it. If Jonathan, the lawyer, had known about the envelope, then my parents had probably suspected, too. They would never leave a loose thread dangling, not when their empire depended on it. Back at my small hotel room, I locked the door and drew the curtains. My hands shook as I spread the contents across the bed. Property deeds, stock certificates, notes in my grandfather's steady script, each piece was a nail in the coffin of their lies. The sealed packet labeled for court use stared back at me, heavier than everything else combined. I traced my finger over the seal but didn't open it yet, not until I knew I was ready. The notebook caught my attention again. I flipped through its pages more slowly this time, studying the details. He had documented everything: dates, names, transactions. There were even scribbled remarks in the margins. "Watch Marcus. He lies easily." My father's name, written in black ink like a warning. "Vanessa too eager. Promises ring hollow." My mother. My chest tightened as I realized he had seen them clearly long before I did. He hadn't been blind to their manipulation. He had prepared for it. Tears welled in my eyes, but this time they weren't from grief. They were from fury. For years, they had told me I was the weak one, the unwanted one, the invisible shadow. But here was proof that the only thing weak about me was believing them. My grandfather had known my worth even when they didn't. A knock rattled the door and I froze. My pulse surged, loud in my ears. I crept toward the peephole and peered out. Nothing but an empty hallway. Still, the sense of danger lingered. I waited, breath held, until the silence stretched thin. Finally, I stepped back, heart pounding. They knew I had left the city. It wouldn't take much for them to guess why. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the old hotel walls made me jolt awake. At one point, I thought I heard footsteps outside my door. I grabbed the documents and held them to my chest, whispering to myself, they will not take this from me. Not again. By morning, exhaustion weighed on me, but adrenaline kept me upright. I packed the papers into my bag, double wrapping them in plain folders. I left through the back entrance, weaving through side streets until I reached a crowded cafe. Sitting at a corner table, I spread out only a few pages at a time, memorizing the details. The more I read, the more the puzzle came together. My parents hadn't just lied, they had orchestrated a campaign to erase me. They forged documents, manipulated witnesses, told the world I had cut myself off. They painted me as the selfish one, the careless one, while grooming my brother as the perfect heir. And now, with my grandfather gone, they thought their performance was complete. But they hadn't counted on this box. They hadn't counted on me finding it. Halfway through my second coffee, I realized I couldn't do this alone. Evidence was powerful, but exposure was stronger. I needed someone who could help me shine a light on the truth, someone untouchable by my father's influence. A name surfaced in my mind, Elliot. We had been close years ago, before my family drove a wedge between us. He was a journalist now, one with a reputation for tearing down corrupt businessmen. I had watched his articles spark outrage, topple careers. If anyone could help me, it was him. I pulled out my phone, my fingers hovering over the screen. It had been years since we last spoke. I almost expected his number to be disconnected. But when I typed it in and pressed call, the line rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Then a voice, deeper than I remembered but still familiar. Emily? My throat tightened. Elliot, it's me. There was a pause, then a sharp intake of breath. It's been a long time. I know, I said quickly. I wouldn't call if it wasn't important. I have something big, and I need your help. He didn't respond immediately, but I could hear the tension in his silence. Finally, he said, Where are you? I glanced around the cafe, lowering my voice. London, can we meet? Another pause, then his voice firm. Send me the address, I'll be there. I hung up, my hands trembling. For the first time since this nightmare began, I didn't feel entirely alone. Still, as I packed away the papers and prepared to leave, a thought struck me cold. If I could find Elliot, so could they. And if my parents knew I was reaching out to the press, they wouldn't just sit back and watch. They would come for me. I straightened, clutching my bag tightly. Let them, I whispered to myself. Let them try. The cafe smelled of burnt espresso and buttered toast, the kind of place where secrets could slip unnoticed between the clatter of cups and the hum of conversation. I chose a table near the back, my bag pressed against my leg, the documents inside like a heartbeat I couldn't ignore. Every time the bell above the door jingled, my eyes snapped up. For a moment, every stranger looked like a threat. Then I saw him, Elliot. He looked older, sharper, with lines at the corners of his eyes that hadn't been there when we were 20. His hair was darker now, and his suit had the kind of careless polish that only came from long nights chasing stories. But his gaze, piercing, restless, was exactly the same. He spotted me instantly, and for a second, something unreadable flickered across his face. Relief? Curiosity? Anger? He sat down opposite me, setting his phone on the table like a shield. Emily, he said slowly, as if testing the name on his tongue. Elliot, I whispered back, my throat suddenly dry. There was a pause, heavy with the weight of all the years we hadn't spoken. Then his eyes dropped to my bag. You sounded urgent. What is this about? I hesitated, then slid one of the documents across the table, careful not to draw attention. He scanned the page, his brows furrowing deeper with each line. These are stock certificates, property deeds? He looked up sharply. Where did you get this? My grandfather, I said, my voice firm despite the tremor in my chest. He left them for me, but they weren't included in the will reading. My parents forged papers to erase me from the inheritance. This, I tapped the page. This proves it. Elliot leaned back, exhaling slowly. Emily, do you realize what you're saying? If this is true, it's not just fraud. It's a scandal. It could destroy them. That's the point, I said, my voice colder than I meant. They've destroyed me my entire life. It's time they felt what it's like to lose. He studied me for a long moment. You've changed, he said finally. You used to be softer. I met his gaze without flinching. I don't have the luxury of being soft anymore. Silence stretched between us until he reached for another page. He skimmed it quickly, his journalist's mind already racing ahead. "This is enough to raise questions," he said carefully. "But if you want to bring them down completely, we'll need more. Witnesses, dates, paper trails. And you'll need to be ready. Once this goes public, they'll come after you harder than ever." "They already are," I whispered, remembering the knock at my hotel door, the footsteps in the hall. "I think they know I'm on to them." Elliot's jaw tightened. "Then we don't have much time." For the next hour, we went through the documents together, whispering over coffee refills. He took photos of each page with a burner phone, uploading them to a secure drive. "If anything happens to you," he said quietly, "these won't disappear." The thought chilled me, but it also steadied me. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't standing on the battlefield alone. When we finally stood to leave, the cafe felt too small, the air too heavy. Outside, the city roared on, oblivious to the storm brewing in its streets. Elliot walked me to the corner, his hands shoved deep into his coat pockets. "I'll start digging," he promised. "But Emily, once this starts, you can't stop it." "Are you ready for that?" I looked past him toward the skyline where the glass towers glittered like sharpened knives. My parents lived in those towers, thrived in them, believing they were untouchable. I clenched my fists, feeling the edges of my grandfather's letter inside my pocket, steady and strong. "Yes," I said, my voice steady now. "I've been ready my whole life. They just never saw it." As Elliot nodded and melted back into the crowd, I stood alone on the street corner. The wind whipped my hair into my face, but I didn't flinch. The city no longer felt foreign or cold. It felt like the starting line of a war I was finally prepared to fight. I tightened my grip on the bag and whispered under my breath, a promise to myself and to my grandfather. "They thought they erased me, but I'm still here. And this time, I'm not leaving quietly." The next morning, I woke with a plan. Hiding in shadows had its place, but sooner or later I would have to step into the light and let them see I wasn't gone. I needed to test their reactions, watch their faces when they realized I was still here and stronger than they imagined. I dressed carefully, nothing extravagant, just a black coat and boots. I wanted to look steady, composed, unshakable. My reflection in the mirror still carried traces of the girl they had tried to erase, but her eyes were different now. Sharper, hungrier. The estate gates looked even taller in daylight, the iron bars gleaming in the winter sun. A guard stood at the entrance, one I didn't recognize. He straightened as I approached, suspicion flickering in his eyes. "Can I help you?" he asked. "Tell them Emily's here," I said firmly. He frowned. "Miss, I don't think—" "Tell them," I cut in, my voice ice. "And watch how quickly they come running." He hesitated, then picked up the phone. Minutes later, the gates buzzed open with a groan of metal. My heart pounded, but I forced my steps steady. Gravel crunched beneath my boots as I walked the long driveway, memories clawing at me with every step. I remembered chasing fireflies here as a child, my grandfather's laugh echoing behind me. Now it felt like walking into enemy territory. The front door swung open before I reached it. My mother stood there, immaculate as always, her silk blouse gleaming, her lipstick a precise crimson slash. But her eyes betrayed her. For the briefest second, I saw fear flicker before she smoothed it away with a practiced smile. "Emily," she said, her tone airy, almost amused. "What a surprise." I stopped a few feet away, tilting my head. "Surprised to see me alive, or surprised I found out what you've been hiding?" Her smile faltered. Behind her, my father appeared, his expression carved from stone. He didn't speak, just studied me with that calculating gaze that had once made me shrink. But I didn't shrink this time. I met his eyes, unblinking. My brother strolled in last, hair tousled, tie loose as though he'd just rolled out of bed. He smirked when he saw me. Well, the ghost returns." I ignored him. My focus was on the two who had orchestrated everything. "You stole from me," I said quietly, my voice carrying more weight than if I had shouted. "You forged, you lied, you made sure I missed his last days, and you thought I'd never know." My mother's lips tightened. "You're being dramatic." "No," I said, stepping closer, the words spilling like fire. "I'm being precise. I have the documents, the deeds, the letters, I know everything." The silence that followed was electric. My brother's smirk vanished. My father's jaw flexed. My mother's hand twitched at her side, the tiniest crack in her composure. Finally, my father spoke, his voice low and dangerous. "Careful, Emily. You don't know the storm you're inviting." I leaned in, close enough to smell his cologne, the same one he'd worn since I was a child. "You don't know the storm I've become." For a moment, none of them moved. Then my mother stepped back, her mask sliding firmly into place. "This conversation is over," she said coolly. "If you insist on embarrassing yourself with wild accusations, I suggest you leave before we have you escorted out." I almost laughed. The threat was so predictable, so hollow. I took a step back, but I didn't turn away. This isn't over, not even close. I left the estate with their eyes burning into my back, but instead of feeling defeated, I felt a surge of power. For the first time, I had rattled them. They had expected me broken, begging. Instead, I had stood on their doorstep with fire in my veins. And as the gates closed behind me, I knew one thing with absolute certainty: they were afraid. The next morning, my face was on the news. Not because of what I'd done, but because of what they wanted the world to believe about me. The anchor's voice was calm, but her words were poison. The Carter family has released a statement this morning regarding their estranged daughter, Summer Chavez. According to the statement, Summer has struggled for years with instability, estrangement, and financial troubles. The family insists they have always supported her, but claims she is now attempting to blackmail them with fabricated documents. A photo of me flashed across the screen, an old one taken years ago when I looked tired, my hair unkempt. They had chosen it deliberately, an image that painted me as weak, unstable. My chest burned with rage. I turned off the television and paced my apartment. This was their game, not just to discredit me privately, but to strip me bare in front of the world. If people believed their story, then my evidence would look like nothing more than the ramblings of a bitter, forgotten daughter. The phone buzzed. "Elliot, I'm guessing you've seen the news," he said grimly. "Yes," I hissed. "They're painting me as some kind of lunatic." "That's their strategy," he said. "Discredit you before you can speak, but it won't work if we move fast. We need to leak pieces of the evidence, small, undeniable truths that build a bigger picture. Not everything at once, just enough to make the world question their story." My fists clenched. "Let's do it." That evening, Elliot came to my apartment. He laid out his laptop, files open, eyes sharp with determination. "We'll start with the stock transfers," he explained. "Numbers don't lie. Once people see the inconsistencies, they'll start to wonder what else your parents are hiding." I handed him the copies, and he scanned them quickly, his jaw tightening. "This is good, very good. They can scream about instability all they want, but numbers like these, they don't disappear." As we worked, I couldn't stop thinking about my parents' faces when I'd confronted them at the estate. My mother's mask cracking, my father's jaw tightening. They had looked afraid, but now they were retaliating with every tool they had. They were powerful, wealthy, respected. And me, I was just one woman with a stack of papers and a journalist friend, but maybe that was enough. By midnight, Elliot had crafted a draft article. He leaned back, rubbing his eyes. "This won't destroy them, not yet. But it will make people look twice, and that's the beginning of the end." I stared at the glowing screen, my name typed out in black and white, not as a victim, but as a whistleblower. A new identity forming. My grandfather's words echoed again in my mind: "Strength is in persistence." When Elliot left, I stood by the window, staring out at the city lights. Somewhere across town, my family was probably sipping wine in their penthouse, congratulating themselves on silencing me. They thought their statement was enough to bury me again, but what they didn't realize was that they had only made me louder. The next morning, Elliot's article went live. Within hours, social media buzzed. Screenshots of the documents spread like wildfire. Some dismissed them, but others asked questions. Why were shares transferred so suddenly? Why did the dates overlap suspiciously with Henry Carter's illness? Why were signatures inconsistent? I scrolled through the comments, my heart pounding. For the first time, the public wasn't just listening to them. They were listening to me, and I knew my family could feel the shift too, because by noon my phone rang, a number I hadn't seen in months, my father's. I let it ring twice before answering. His voice was calm, measured, the way it always was when he was trying to control the narrative. "Emily," he said, "we need to talk." I smiled grimly, even though he couldn't see it. "Yes," I said softly, "we do." I agreed to meet my father in a hotel lounge downtown. Neutral territory, too public for outright threats, but private enough for daggers hidden in words. I arrived 10 minutes early, choosing a corner table where I could see the whole room. The golden chandeliers sparkled above, but their light felt cold, sterile. He walked in right on time, his suit tailored to perfection, his tie a deep navy that screamed power. My mother followed a step behind, her heels clicking against the marble floor. They looked like royalty surveying their kingdom, and yet for the first time I noticed something else in their posture: tension. "Emily," my father said smoothly as they sat down, "you look well." I leaned back, folding my arms. "Save the pleasantries, you didn't come here to talk about my health." My mother gave a brittle smile. "You've caused quite a stir, publishing forged documents, slandering your own family, it's embarrassing." "They're not forged," I shot back. I slid a folder onto the table, one page half visible. My father's eyes flicked down to it just for a moment, and in that flicker I saw unease. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. You don't understand what you're doing. This isn't a game. You're tampering with things far bigger than inheritance squabbles. Bigger? I echoed, my pulse spiking. Like laundering money through shell companies, like forging signatures to steal what was mine. My mother's face hardened. Watch your tone. No, I snapped, my voice sharp enough to draw a glance from the waiter across the room. For years, I let you dictate the tone. I let you decide who I was, what I was worth. Not anymore. The air between us crackled. My father's composure was iron, but I could see the crack forming in his jaw, the way his fingers twitched against the armrest. Finally, he said, You want money? Fine, name your price. Walk away and we can all pretend this never happened. I laughed, a short, bitter sound. You think this is about money? You erased me. You made me miss his funeral. You told the world I abandoned him. This isn't about money. This is about truth. My mother leaned in, her voice low and venomous. Truth doesn't matter if no one believes you. I met her gaze steadily. Then I'll make them believe. For the first time, her smile slipped. My father pushed back his chair abruptly, the legs scraping against the marble. Enough, he said. His voice was low, controlled, but I knew that tone. It was the voice he used right before unleashing hell. You're making a mistake you won't be able to walk away from. He turned and strode toward the exit, my mother following, her perfume trailing behind like poison. But just before they disappeared through the doors, she glanced back at me. And for a split second, her mask cracked. I saw fear. I sat there long after they'd gone, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. Their threats had been veiled, but they were real. They wouldn't let me tear down their empire without a fight. When I finally stood to leave, the waiter approached cautiously. Everything all right, miss? He asked. I forced a small smile. Not yet, I said softly, but it will be. Outside, the city was loud, chaotic, alive. I pulled my coat tighter and walked faster, every shadow suddenly sharper, every stranger a potential threat. But I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't hiding. If they wanted war, I was ready to give it to them. The night after the hotel meeting, I barely slept. Every sound outside my window, footsteps, car doors slamming, even the hum of an elevator, set my nerves on edge. I kept replaying their words in my mind, the calm venom in my father's voice, the brittle steel in my mother. You won't be able to walk away from this. It was a threat, but also an admission. They knew I wasn't bluffing. By morning, Elliot was at my door, laptop bag slung over his shoulder. We don't have much time, he said without preamble. They're going to hit back harder. We need to get ahead of them. I motioned him inside, pushing aside stacks of papers on the table. He spread his laptop open and began pulling up files. I've been digging deeper. Your father's shell corporations aren't just a smokescreen. They tie into offshore accounts, millions funneled out of the company. If we leak this, it won't just be a family scandal. It'll be a financial crime story that no one can ignore. The words made my stomach knot. And what happens when they realize you're the one publishing this? He gave a grim smile. I've had worse threats, but this could be career-defining. And for you, it could be justice. I sat across from him, the documents spread between us like weapons. For the first time, I felt like we were arming ourselves for battle. Then let's do it. He nodded, but before his fingers touched the keyboard, my phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. This time, it wasn't a text. It was a video. I hesitated, then pressed play. The screen flickered, and suddenly I was staring at a shaky recording of myself leaving the cafe where I'd met Elliot days ago. The camera followed me down the street, lingering too long, invasive and deliberate. My breath caught. They were watching me. Elliot leaned over my shoulder, his expression hardening. Trying to rattle you, make you paranoid. It's working, I whispered, but even as fear clawed at my chest, anger rose to smother it. They wanted me cornered, small, trembling. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. I deleted the video and turned to Elliot. Then we moved faster. Release the first piece today. That afternoon, Elliot uploaded the article. It was surgical, clean, factual, undeniable. Bank statements, corporate transfers, paper trails pointing straight back to my father. By evening, the internet was on fire. Hashtags with my family's name trended, financial blogs picked it up, and whispers began to spread in places they couldn't control. I scrolled through the chaos with trembling hands. Part of me expected my phone to explode, for someone to break down my door the second the story hit. But instead, what I saw was validation. Strangers were connecting the dots, asking questions, refusing to swallow the perfect image my parents had sold the world. But victory was short-lived. By nightfall, another headline appeared, not about the documents, about me, a photo plastered across tabloids taken outside my apartment. The caption screamed, Estranged Carter-daughter spirals, seen entering apartment of disgraced journalist. Elliot swore under his breath. They're painting us as unstable, reckless. If they can discredit both of us, the evidence won't matter. I stared at the screen, my blood boiling. Then we don't stop. We keep pushing until the truth is too loud to ignore. He looked at me, and for a moment I thought I saw something beyond determination in his eyes, something almost protective. "Emily," he said quietly, "they won't just fight you in the press. They'll fight you in court, maybe even worse. You need to be ready for that." I swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking in. But deep down, I already knew. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. This was war. I stood, gripping the envelope of my grandfather's letters. They took everything from me. My place in this family, my voice, my memories of him. If they want a war, I met Elliot's gaze, steady, unflinching. Then I'll give them one. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, the city alive with noise and fury. But in that moment, I felt only silence. The silence before the storm breaks. The summons arrived 2 days later, tucked into a crisp white envelope slid under my apartment door. No knock, no warning, just the weight of a lawsuit staring up at me in black and white. My father's name scrawled across the top, backed by the family's high-powered attorneys. Defamation, blackmail, extortion. They weren't just denying the truth anymore. They were dragging me into court, trying to crush me with the very system they controlled. I sat on the edge of the couch, the papers trembling in my hands. My chest felt tight, like the walls of the apartment had suddenly shrunk around me. For a brief, terrifying moment, I thought I couldn't breathe. Then I heard Elliot's knock. He slipped inside, scanning my face before his eyes dropped to the documents. "Damn," he muttered, picking them up. "They didn't waste any time." "They're going to destroy me," I whispered, my voice cracking in a way I hated. "They'll use every resource, every connection. I can't fight them in court." "Yes, you can," Elliot interrupted sharply, his eyes locking on mine. "That's what they want you to believe. But remember, Emily, they're scared. People with nothing to hide don't go nuclear this fast." His words steadied me, though my pulse still raced. "So what do we do?" He paced, the lawsuit still in his hand. "We play 2 games at once. We prepare for their legal fight, and we keep feeding the public. If we let them control the narrative, they win. But if we show the world what they're trying to bury, people will start to question why the Carters are so desperate to silence you." I rubbed my temples, the weight of it pressing down on me. "And if the court doesn't care about public opinion? Then we win outside of it first," he said firmly. Later that night, I pulled the curtains closed and spread out the papers again, forcing myself to read every word. My family's lawyers had painted me as a liar, a manipulator, a desperate woman inventing conspiracies to cash in on wealth I didn't deserve. I could almost hear my mother dictating the phrases, the cold precision of her lies. But as I read, a spark of defiance flickered inside me. They thought they could bury me under paperwork and smear campaigns. They thought I'd crumble under the weight of their money. But if they were going to drag me into the spotlight, then I would burn brighter than they imagined. The following morning, Elliot arranged a meeting with a lawyer he trusted, a woman named Claire, sharp-eyed and blunt. She listened to my story without flinching, flipping through the documents I handed her. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and gave me a long, assessing look. "Legally," she said, "this is going to be hell. They've got power, money, judges in their pocket, but if what you're showing me is real, and it looks real, you have a case. A dangerous one, but a case." Her words settled in my chest like a weight and a lifeline all at once. For the first time, I wasn't alone against them. After the meeting, Elliot and I walked through the city streets, the autumn wind whipping at our coats. "She's good," he said quietly. "If anyone can stand up to their lawyers, it's her. But we'll need more than legal arguments. We need proof that destroys their image." Proof. The word lingered in my mind long after we parted ways. That night, I dug deeper into the box of my grandfather's belongings. Old letters, photographs, scribbled notes in the margins of his journals. And then, tucked between pages of an old leather-bound book, I found it, a receipt, yellowed and fragile. My grandfather's signature at the bottom, dated just weeks before his death. It was a deed transfer, land sold, but the buyer's name had been scratched out, replaced in a different hand with my father's. My heart hammered. The forgery wasn't subtle once you saw it. The handwriting didn't match. The ink was darker, fresher, as if someone had altered it after the fact. This wasn't just suspicion anymore, this was proof. I called Elliot immediately, my voice trembling. "I found something." By the time he arrived, I had the receipt laid out on the table. He bent over it, his breath catching. This is huge. Emily, this isn't just inheritance fraud. This is criminal. If this comes out, your father could face charges." I stared at the paper, my hands curling into fists. The idea of my father in handcuffs felt almost impossible. He had always been untouchable, larger than life, the man who controlled every room he entered. But now, for the first time, I saw the possibility of chains replacing his cufflinks. "Then we leak it," I said fiercely. Elliot shook his head. "Not yet. If we play this too soon, they'll bury it, discredit it, twist it into something else. We have to build the case brick by brick, make it impossible for them to explain away." I wanted to argue, but deep down I knew he was right. This was war, and wars weren't won in a single battle. Still, as I stared at the forged deed under the dim light of my apartment, I swore to myself, this was the beginning of their downfall. They thought a lawsuit would silence me, but all it had done was light a fire I could never put out. And when the flames reached them, they'd realize too late that I was no longer the girl they discarded. I was the reckoning they had created. The first leak hit the internet on a cold Thursday morning. Elliot had crafted it with surgical precision, not a torrent of accusations, but a single, undeniable fragment of truth. The forged deed. It appeared on his blog first, accompanied by side-by-side comparisons of the handwriting, expert notes from a graphologist, and the timeline of events surrounding my grandfather's death. It wasn't an opinion piece. It was evidence, laid out like a scalpel cutting through flesh. By noon, the story had spread. Some people scoffed, others defended the Carters, but more and more began asking questions. Why had the deed been altered? Why wasn't this document included in the will? My parents' carefully polished narrative was cracking, and I could almost hear the splintering. The response from my family was immediate. Another statement, this time more aggressive. Summer Chavez is a troubled young woman being manipulated by dishonest journalists. She is lashing out in grief, unable to accept the truth of her grandfather's will. It was the same refrain. Dismiss, discredit, deny, but this time it didn't land as cleanly. Too many eyes were already on the inconsistencies. That evening my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Emily?" The voice was hesitant, rough with age. It's Margaret. I don't know if you remember me." For a moment the name didn't register. Then it hit me. Margaret. She had been our housekeeper for nearly 20 years before she left suddenly, just a year before my grandfather's death. She had practically raised me in those hallways, teaching me how to sew buttons back onto my school uniforms, sneaking me cookies when my mother wasn't looking. And then one day she was gone, her name never spoken in the house again. "Margaret," my voice cracked. "Of course I remember. Why, how are you calling me?" "I saw the article," she said quickly. "I saw the deed. Emily. I know you're telling the truth, because I saw your father with those papers, the night your grandfather died." My blood froze. "What?" "I was cleaning the study," she said, her voice trembling. "Your father was there with another man, one of the lawyers. They had the documents spread across the desk. I didn't understand everything, but I saw him scratch something out and write over it. When he saw me, he dismissed me, but I knew something wasn't right." My knees weakened, and I sank onto the couch. "Why didn't you say anything?" Her silence stretched. "Because your mother paid me off. More money than I'd ever seen in my life. She told me if I spoke, they'd ruin me. I had children, Emily. I was terrified, but now," her voice cracked. "Now I can't stay silent. I want to help you." Tears blurred my vision, hot and relentless. Margaret. The woman who had tied my shoelaces, who had held me when I cried, who had vanished without a word. And now, after all these years, she was reaching for me again. I wiped my face quickly, forcing steadiness into my voice. "Then help me, tell your story. If you're willing, Elliot can interview you. We can protect you this time." "I'll do it," she whispered. "I should have done it years ago." After the call, I sat in silence, my heart pounding. A new piece of the puzzle had fallen into place, not just paper proof, but a human witness. Someone who had seen my father's betrayal with her own eyes. When I told Elliot, his face lit with something like triumph. This changes everything. Documents can be debated. Experts can be questioned. But a witness, that's a living voice. If she's willing to go on record, this could blow the story wide open. For the first time, I felt the faintest shimmer of hope. It wasn't just me anymore. It wasn't just Elliot and his articles or the fragile pieces of paper I clung to like lifelines. Now I had an ally, someone who had once been silenced but was ready to speak. That night, I dreamed of my grandfather again. He was sitting in his study, the one filled with books that smelled like tobacco and ink. He looked at me, his kind eyes steady, and said only one word: persistence. When I woke, I understood. Persistence wasn't just about enduring. It was about finding the voices that had been buried and letting them rise. But even as I clung to that hope, I knew my family wouldn't stay passive. If Margaret came forward, if she dared to step into the light, they wouldn't just come after me anymore. They'd come after her too, and I wasn't sure if I could protect her. Elliot arranged the meeting in a safe place, a small office above a bookstore owned by one of his contacts. It smelled of old paper and dust, the kind of place where secrets could settle quietly. Margaret arrived in the late afternoon, bundled in a heavy coat, her gray hair pulled back neatly. When I saw her, something inside me broke. She looked older, more fragile than the woman I remembered, but her eyes, those warm, steady eyes, were the same. For a second, I wasn't the woman waging war against her family. I was just a girl again, running into the kitchen where Margaret always waited with a cookie and a smile. "Emily," she whispered, reaching for my hands. Her grip was firm, stronger than I expected. "I'm so sorry." Tears stung my eyes, but I shook my head. "Don't be sorry, you're here now, that's what matters." Elliot gave us a moment before setting up his recorder. "Margaret," he said gently, "we just need you to tell the truth, everything you remember, no embellishments, just what you saw." She nodded, her hands trembling slightly. And then she began. Her words spilled out, weaving the night of my grandfather's death like a tapestry. The study lamp glowing late, the sound of voices sharp and low, my father's pen scratching over paper. She described the moment he noticed her, the way he froze, then dismissed her coldly. She even remembered the smell of whiskey in the room, how the air had been heavy with something unspoken. When she finished, Elliot leaned back, visibly shaken. "That's powerful," he murmured. "It's not just corroboration, it's a human truth. People will feel this." I looked at Margaret, my chest aching. "If you do this, they'll come after you. They'll try to silence you again." Her eyes softened. "I've lived with the weight of silence for too long. It crushed me, Emily. Every time I looked at my children, I thought about the lie I helped cover. No more. If they want to come after me, let them. I'm not afraid anymore." I squeezed her hands tighter, my throat thick. That night, Elliot wrote the article. He worked quickly but carefully, quoting Margaret's testimony, weaving it with the forged deed, laying out the story with precision. When it went live, it was like lighting a fuse. The internet erupted. Suddenly, it wasn't just whispers, it was outrage. Commentators dissected every word, financial analysts speculated about charges, and ordinary people flooded social media with demands for answers. The Carters weren't just a powerful family anymore, they were suspects, but with the fire came smoke. 3 nights later, Margaret called me in a panic. "They followed me," she whispered. 2 men. I saw them outside my apartment. They didn't say anything, but I know they were watching. My blood turned to ice. "Where are you now?" "At my sister," she said. "But Emily, they know I spoke." I promised her I'd protect her, though my voice shook as I said it. After the call, Elliot paced the apartment, his jaw tight. "They're escalating," he muttered. "This isn't just reputation damage anymore. They're trying to scare her back into silence." "And me too," I added, glancing at the window. A black car had been idling across the street all evening, its headlights off. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was. Sleep became impossible after that. Every creak in the apartment made me jolt upright. Every shadow stretched too long. I wasn't just fighting in headlines anymore, I was being hunted. And then the first real crack appeared. Elliot received an anonymous email. It contained a scanned page from a ledger, one I had never seen before. It listed transactions, offshore accounts, and at the bottom, a signature. My brother's. I stared at it, my stomach twisting. "No. That can't be," but Elliot shook his head. "It's real. This is just your father's doing. Your brother is tied into it too." The revelation hit me like a blow. My brother, the one who smirked at me at the will reading, the one who had everything handed to him, hadn't just been a passive beneficiary. He had been part of the theft. I thought back to that night outside the estate, hearing his laughter drift across the lawn. It hadn't been careless arrogance. It had been the laughter of someone who believed he was untouchable. Now I knew why. My fists clenched as I stared at his name on the ledger. "Then he's going down with them." Elliot looked at me carefully. "Emily, this is the first real twist. People will believe a daughter could be jealous, resentful, unstable. But a brother's name on financial crimes? That's a different story. This could change everything." I exhaled shakily, fire burning through the fear. My family thought they had buried me. But now the ground was cracking beneath them, and they had no idea how deep the fault line went. The ledger burned in my hands like fire. My brother's name wasn't just a scribble, it was a signature, bold and deliberate, tying him directly to the fraud. For days, I couldn't stop staring at it. Every memory of him, his careless grin, the way he leaned back in his chair at the will reading, his smug dismissal, now carried the stench of guilt. "This is it," I told Elliot one night, slamming the ledger down on the table between us. "This is the evidence that takes him down. Not just my father, not just my mother, him, my brother, he can't hide from this." Elliot studied me carefully. "It's explosive," he agreed, "but we have to be smart. If we drop this without backup, they'll call it fabricated. We need corroboration. Someone inside the company, maybe. Someone who can tie his signature to the actual transactions. I bit my lip. And who would do that? Everyone on their payroll is terrified of them. Elliot leaned back, thoughtful. Sometimes fear turns into betrayal. We just need to find the right crack. We didn't have to wait long, because my family made their next move first. 2 mornings later, I woke to my phone vibrating nonstop. Messages flooded in, friends, strangers, even journalists I didn't know. When I finally opened a news site, my heart dropped. The headline screamed, Summer Chavez's troubled past, drug use expelled from university, history of instability. There were photos, grainy shots from parties in my college years, moments I barely remembered. Me holding a red plastic cup, me laughing with friends, me stumbling after too many drinks. They had dug through every mistake, every careless night, and packaged it as evidence that I was unhinged, unreliable, a liar. My hands shook as I scrolled. They claimed I had stolen from classmates, that I'd been hospitalized for a breakdown, that I'd left school in disgrace. Some of it was exaggerated, some of it was flat-out lies, but some of it was real. I felt sick. My past, the things I had buried, the things I thought I had outrun, they were dragging them into the light, and the world was eating it up. Elliot came over immediately. He found me sitting on the floor, my laptop abandoned, my hands pressed to my face. "This is what they do," he said quietly, crouching beside me. "They can't kill the evidence, so they try to kill the witness. You. But people will believe it," I choked out. "They'll see me as a mess, as some unstable woman inventing conspiracies because she ruined her own life." He took my hands, forcing me to meet his eyes. "Listen to me. Everyone has mistakes. Everyone has shadows. They're just trying to twist yours into a weapon. But this," he tapped the ledger on the table, "this is stronger than any smear campaign. We just need to hold steady." But the hits kept coming. That evening, another article dropped. This one was worse. It claimed my grandfather had cut me out of his life deliberately, that he'd grown tired of my reckless behavior and had told family friends he didn't trust me with his legacy. There was even a supposed statement from an old business partner backing up the story. I stared at the screen, bile rising in my throat. They weren't just twisting my past anymore, they were rewriting his memory. "They're trying to turn him against me even in death," I whispered. Elliot's jaw clenched. "Then we prove the opposite. We show the world the truth about your grandfather's trust in you. Do you still have his letters?" My hands shook as I pulled them from the envelope. My grandfather's handwriting, careful and deliberate, spelling out his pride in me, his love, his promises for the future. Words no article could erase. Elliot scanned them, then looked up. "This is what we use, not just documents. His voice, his love for you, that's what breaks through the lies." But even as we planned our counterattack, I couldn't shake the image of those headlines. The world had seen me as a victim, then as a fighter. Now they were painting me as unstable, unworthy, dangerous. And somewhere in the middle of it, my brother was laughing. I could almost hear it. He thought he was safe, shielded by their wealth, their spin, their endless reach. But he didn't know I had his name in black and white, and when I revealed it, no smear campaign would save him. The next move had to be mine. The smear campaign had left bruises, but not wounds deep enough to stop me. My brother's name on the ledger was dynamite, and if I set it off carefully, the explosion would be impossible to contain. Elliot and I worked through the night. We drafted the article, piecing together the ledger with other supporting documents, emails that referenced his signature, internal memos that contradicted his public statements. The picture was clear. My brother wasn't just a beneficiary, he was an architect. "Once this goes live," Elliot said, rubbing his temples, "he won't be able to laugh it off. Not even your parents can shield him from this." I nodded, but doubt gnawed at me. "They'll say it's fake. That we forged it." "Then we get corroboration," Elliot countered. "We need someone who saw him sign these transactions, someone inside the company." It sounded impossible. Who would dare betray him? But then, 2 days later, the impossible happened. The message came through a private channel Elliot used for tips. Short, anonymous, "Meet me. I know what your brother did." Elliot was cautious, insisting we vet the source, but my gut told me this was real. Desperation creates cracks, and cracks let the truth leak out. We arranged a meeting in a dim parking garage, the kind of place where shadows felt alive. I waited in the passenger seat while Elliot stood by the hood of the car, hands visible, calm but alert. A figure emerged from the far corner, coat collar turned up, face partially hidden. When they stepped into the light, my breath caught. It was my aunt, my mother's younger sister, Caroline. I hadn't seen her in years. She had always been the quiet one, the obedient shadow at family dinners, never speaking unless spoken to. My mother controlled her like a puppet, using her as a secretary, a chauffeur, and errand runner. I had written her off as part of their machine. But here she was, standing before me, her eyes darting nervously as she whispered, "Emily, I don't have much time." Elliot tensed. "Why are you here?" She looked at me, her voice trembling. "Because I can't watch them destroy you the way they destroyed him." "Who?" I asked. "Your grandfather," she said. "He trusted me with things. He knew your parents were circling like vultures. He gave me copies of documents, told me to keep them safe. I didn't know what to do. Your mother would have ruined me if I spoke. But when I saw what they're doing to you now, I couldn't stay quiet." My chest tightened. "You mean you've had proof all this time?" Tears welled in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Emily, I was a coward, but not anymore." She reached into her bag and pulled out a thin folder. Inside were more ledger pages, bank statements, even emails printed out, every one bearing my brother's name. Elliot flipped through them quickly, his hands shaking. "This is it," he whispered. "This is corroboration. Multiple sources, multiple signatures, they can't spin this away." I stared at my aunt, torn between gratitude and anger. "Why now? Why not before?" Her lips trembled. "Because I thought I was protecting myself. But I realize now I was helping them bury him, and bury you. I can't undo what I did, but I can help you now." For a long moment I couldn't speak. The betrayal of her silence clashed with the relief of her courage. Finally, I swallowed hard and nodded. "Then stand with me. Don't just hand me papers. Be willing to speak." Her face hardened, and for the first time I saw steel in her eyes. "I will." That night, we prepared the release. Elliot was meticulous, cross-referencing the documents, layering Margaret's testimony with my aunt's evidence, and framing it all in a narrative too strong to ignore. When it went live the next morning, it was like watching a dam break. News outlets picked it up instantly. Headlines screamed about the Carter scandal, financial watchdogs demanded investigations, and the stock price of my father's company began to slide. But the image that stayed with me wasn't the headlines. It was my aunt's face, trembling but resolute, as she sat across from me and said, "They don't own me anymore." For the first time, I realized something crucial. My fight wasn't just mine. It was freeing the others who had been trapped in their web, Margaret, my aunt, maybe even more. My family had built an empire of silence, but silence was breaking all around them. Still, I knew what was coming. Cornered animals are the most dangerous. And my parents weren't about to watch their empire collapse without a final strike. The fallout from the second article was immediate and brutal. By dawn, my family's empire was shaking. News anchors dissected every document, commentators questioned every move, and investigators announced they were reviewing potential financial misconduct. For the first time, I saw cracks in the fortress they had built. But cracks don't make a castle fall. Not yet. And my parents knew it. That night, I received another package. No return address, no name. Just a plain brown envelope slipped under my apartment door. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them, me at different ages, different places, leaving school, entering a hospital, sitting in a bar with friends. Some were harmless, some humiliating. But the last set froze my blood. Photos of me taken recently, outside my new apartment, with Elliot, with Margaret, even with my aunt. Shots from angles that meant someone had been close. Watching. A note slipped between the photos read, "You can't win. Walk away or we'll bury everyone you care about." I sat on the floor, the photos scattered around me, my hands shaking. They weren't threatening just me anymore. They were threatening everyone who had stood by me. When Elliot saw the photos, his jaw tightened. "They're desperate," he said. "This is intimidation, nothing more." But I could hear the fear beneath his anger. We both knew desperation could be lethal. 2 days later, desperation turned to action. Margaret's apartment was broken into. Nothing was stolen, but her belongings were ransacked, her children's photos torn from the walls. She called me in tears, her voice trembling. "They're trying to scare me into silence." I clenched the phone so tightly my knuckles whitened. "Don't let them. Please, Margaret, we're so close." But fear isn't something you can command away. I heard it in her voice, the weight of a mother terrified for her children. I didn't blame her, but I hated them more than ever for forcing her into that corner. And then, just when I thought they couldn't go further, they did. A news alert hit my phone. Summer Chavez under investigation for document forgery and extortion. I read the headline 3 times before it sank in. My parents hadn't just smeared me, they had weaponized the law against me. They had filed criminal charges, backed by evidence that I had doctored the very documents I was using against them. Panic clawed at me, but Elliot grabbed my shoulders. "This is exactly what they want to make you crumble. But listen, Emily, this is their last card. They've dragged you into the fire because they're burning too. If we hold steady, this will backfire." I wanted to believe him, but the weight of it pressed on me like iron. Jail, trials, handcuffs. My family wanted to turn me from the accuser into the accused, from a whistleblower into a criminal. The night after the charges dropped, I received a call I wasn't expecting. My brother. His voice was calm, almost smug. "You should have stayed quiet, Emily. You could have had a comfortable life. Instead, you're going to end up in prison." I gripped the phone, fury boiling. "You're going down with them. Your name is on those ledgers." He laughed, low and cruel. "You really think anyone will believe that? You've always been the unstable one, the problem child, and now everyone sees it. I'll watch you rot while I toast to your failure." The line went dead. I stood in my dark apartment, my fists shaking, the phone still pressed to my ear. His laughter echoed in my skull, louder than the city outside, louder than my own heartbeat. But then I remembered something my grandfather had written in his last letter: "They can only erase you if you let them." And suddenly, the fear shifted. It didn't vanish, but it hardened into resolve. My parents could smear me, threaten me, frame me. They could break into Margaret's home, follow me in the streets, try to bury me alive in lies. But the truth was louder. The truth had allies now, and the truth was about to become unstoppable. Because if they thought lawsuits and smear campaigns would silence me, they had forgotten one thing: they raised me in their house. I knew their secrets, and I wasn't afraid to burn the house down. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and fear. I had never stepped inside one before, and yet, walking through those heavy glass doors, I felt like I'd been preparing for this moment my entire life. The reporters swarmed outside like vultures, their cameras flashing, their voices rising with questions I didn't answer. I kept my head high, my black coat pulled tight around me, Elliot at my side and Claire, my lawyer, striding ahead like a shield. Inside, the courtroom was colder than I imagined. My parents were already seated at the plaintiff's table, immaculate as always, their lawyers lined up beside them in tailored suits. My mother's face was carved into a mask of pity, her eyes brimming with fake sorrow as if I had broken her heart. My father sat stiff, his jaw clenched, radiating control. And my brother leaned back in his chair, that same smirk plastered across his face, as if the outcome was already guaranteed. For a moment, the sight of them all together threatened to crush me. This was the family I had been born into, the family that had shaped me, poisoned me, erased me. And here I was about to stand against them not as a daughter, but as their enemy. The judge entered and the room rose. My legs trembled as I stood, but I forced myself steady. When we sat again, the trial began. Their lawyers spoke first, spinning their web of lies. They painted me as unstable, as a manipulator, as a bitter woman inventing conspiracies for attention. They spoke of my troubled youth, my estrangement from family, my supposed obsession with money I never earned. With each word, my stomach churned, but Claire squeezed my arm under the table. "Let them talk," she whispered. "They're digging their own grave." Then it was our turn. Claire rose, her voice steady, sharp as a blade. She didn't start with me. She started with the documents, the forged deed, the bank transfers, the shell corporations. Piece by piece, she laid the foundation, her words weaving a story of calculated theft. The jury's eyes flickered as the exhibits were passed around, their brows furrowing as they traced the dates, the signatures, the undeniable inconsistencies. And then came the witnesses. Margaret was first. She stepped into the courtroom with her head high, her hands trembling only slightly as she took the oath. Seeing her there, facing them after all these years, made my chest ache with pride and fear all at once. She told her story clearly, her voice breaking only once as she described the night she saw my father altering documents in my grandfather's study. My mother's face tightened with every word, her mask cracking as Margaret's truth filled the room. When the cross-examination tried to rattle her, accusing her of lying for money, of holding grudges, she didn't falter. "I lived with this secret for too long," she said firmly. "I won't carry their lies anymore." Next was Caroline, my aunt. If Margaret's testimony was a wound, Caroline was a blade twisting deeper. She produced the folder of documents my grandfather had entrusted to her, her voice steady as she described how he had feared my parents' greed. The jury leaned in as she recounted his words, his instructions, his trust in me. When she finished, silence hung heavy in the room. My parents' composure was gone now. My father's jaw was locked tight, his knuckles white against the table. My mother whispered furiously to the lawyers, her mask slipping into something raw and ugly. And finally, it was my turn. The bailiff called my name, and my legs felt like lead as I walked to the stand. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The weight of the room, the eyes of the jury, the glare of my family, it all pressed down on me like chains. Then I remembered my grandfather's letter. Strength is persistence. Strength is knowing who you are when the world tells you otherwise. I took the oath, sat down, and began to speak. I told them about my childhood, about being erased, about the will reading that shattered me. I told them about finding the documents, about the threats, about the smear campaign that tried to bury me again. My voice shook at first, but then it steadied, fueled by anger and truth. I didn't embellish. I didn't dramatize. I simply told the story of a girl who had been silenced and a woman who refused to stay silent any longer. When I finished, the courtroom was so quiet I could hear my heartbeat echoing in my ears. The cross-examination came, brutal and relentless. They dragged out every mistake from my past, every scar, every shadow. But this time, I didn't shrink. I owned it. Yes, I said when they asked about my reckless years. I made mistakes, but none of them changed the fact that my father and brother forged documents, stole inheritance, and betrayed the man who trusted them most. By the time I stepped down from the stand, I felt hollowed out, but also unbreakable. As I returned to the table, Elliot caught my eye from the gallery. His expression was steady, proud. And in that moment, I knew, no matter how long this trial lasted, no matter how many blows they threw, I wasn't fighting alone anymore. This was no longer their story. It was mine. The second week of the trial felt like a war fought in slow motion. Every day, new evidence was dragged into the light, and every night the media feasted on it like wolves. The Carter name, once synonymous with wealth and respect, now dripped with suspicion. But I knew my parents well enough to understand. Cornered animals lash out hardest when they feel the cage closing, and lash out they did. On the fifth day, their lawyers produced something none of us had expected. An expert witness claiming that the ledger bearing my brother's signature was a forgery. He walked the jury through slides of handwriting samples, pointing out supposed inconsistencies. For a moment, my stomach dropped. If the jury believed him, everything could unravel. Claire was ready. She stood calmly and dismantled his testimony piece by piece, pointing out that his analysis had been funded directly by my father's company. Then she brought in our own forensic expert, who confirmed the authenticity of the documents with far greater authority. Still, the damage was done. Doubt had been planted, and I felt it like a weight pressing down on my chest. That night, Elliot found me pacing the apartment. "They're trying to wear you down," he said. "That's their strategy. If they can't kill the truth, they'll drain you until you can't fight anymore." I stopped pacing, my fists clenched. "Then we need something bigger, something undeniable." It came the next morning. A former accountant from my father's company stepped forward, protected under whistleblower laws. She brought with her a flash drive containing years of hidden records, transactions linking directly to the offshore accounts in my father's and brother's names. When Claire presented the files in court, the silence was deafening. The numbers didn't lie. There it was, black and white: fraud, embezzlement, theft. My brother's smirk finally cracked. I watched his face pale as the jury studied the evidence, his hands clenching into fists on the table. My father's mask held a little longer, but I saw it too, the faint twitch in his jaw, the subtle tremor in his hand as he reached for a glass of water. For the first time, I saw fear in him, but they weren't finished. On the very next day, their legal team dropped their last grenade, a video. The footage showed me years ago at a college party, drunk, shouting, angry. I didn't remember the night, but the image was clear. Me slamming a glass on a table, me screaming words I couldn't even hear over the noise. The caption beneath read, "Would you trust this woman with millions?" The courtroom buzzed. The jury shifted uncomfortably. I felt my stomach twist, bile rising in my throat. They weren't arguing facts anymore. They were attacking me, my credibility, my dignity, my humanity. For a moment, I thought I couldn't do it. I thought maybe they were right, that I was still that broken girl, unworthy, unstable, unfit to carry the weight of my grandfather's trust. I fled the courtroom during recess, stumbling into the hallway, my hands shaking. Elliot followed, grabbing my shoulders. "Hey," he said firmly, forcing me to look at him. "Don't let them do this. That video doesn't define you. It never did." Tears burned my eyes. "But the jury isn't blind," he cut in. "They've seen the evidence. They've heard Margaret. They've heard Caroline. They've seen the numbers. This is all your parents have left, desperation. You've come too far to let them win with smoke and mirrors." I took a shuddering breath, steadying myself, and then I remembered my grandfather's last letter, the one I carried folded in my pocket. I pulled it out and read the words again. "Strength is persistence. Strength is knowing who you are when the world tells you otherwise." When court resumed, I walked back into the room with the letter in my hand. Claire stood and asked permission to submit it as evidence. not as a legal document, but as context, as testimony of intent. The judge allowed it. I read it aloud, my voice trembling at first, then growing stronger. I read my grandfather's words about me, his pride, his faith, his conviction that I was worthy of carrying on his legacy. The jury listened in silence. When I finished, I saw tears in Margaret's eyes, saw Caroline's hands clasped tightly together, saw Elliot nod once, proud. And when I dared to glance at my family's table, I saw the truth. Their empire of lies was collapsing, one brick at a time. The trial wasn't over yet, but the tide had turned. For the first time, it felt like justice wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. The verdict came on a gray morning. Clouds hung low over the courthouse, pressing down like the weight of the past 2 weeks. I sat at the defense table, my hands clenched so tightly my knuckles ached. Across the aisle, my parents sat rigid, their lawyers whispering frantically, while my brother tapped his pen against the table, pretending calm but betraying the twitch of nerves. The jury filed in. 12 strangers who had heard every word, seen every document, measured every truth and lie. The foreman rose, holding the folded piece of paper that could decide everything. My chest tightened as the judge asked for the decision. "We find in favor of the defendant, Summer Chavez." The words didn't register at first. The courtroom erupted, gasps, whispers, the frantic clicking of reporters' keyboards. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her mask shattering into shock. My father's face drained of color, his jaw locked in fury. My brother muttered a curse under his breath, his smirk gone at last. But all I could do was sit there, tears spilling silently down my cheeks as the chains I'd carried for years finally snapped. Claire squeezed my shoulder, her voice steady. "You did it." "No," I thought, my chest heaving. "We did it." Margaret, who had broken her silence. Caroline, who had defied her sister at last. Elliot, who had stood by me when no one else would. My grandfather, whose words had carried me through the darkness. This victory wasn't mine alone. It belonged to every voice they had tried to erase. The aftermath was swift and merciless. Investigators announced a full probe into my father's company. The stock plummeted. Business partners fled. Headlines blared about the Carter collapse. Within weeks, charges were filed against both my father and brother: fraud, forgery, embezzlement. The empire they had built on lies crumbled into dust. I didn't celebrate when I saw the images of them being led away in handcuffs. There was no joy in it, only a deep, hollow ache. They were still my family, by blood if not by love. But as the world watched their fall, I felt something stronger than sorrow. I felt release. My mother disappeared from the public eye, her face no longer gracing charity galas or glossy magazines. Rumors swirled, Europe, South America, but I didn't care. She had spent her life controlling the narrative, and now she had none left to control. For me, life didn't return to what it had been. It couldn't, but it became something new. I moved into a small townhouse near the edge of the city, quiet and unremarkable. For the first time, I chose a home not because it looked impressive, but because it felt safe. I filled it with books from my grandfather's library, photographs of Margaret's children, small gifts Caroline brought on visits. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't wealth, but it was mine. One evening, months after the trial, Elliot stopped by. We sat on the porch steps, watching the sun sink low, painting the sky in shades of gold and fire. He nudged my shoulder. "You realize what you've done, right? You didn't just win a case, you broke an empire." I smiled faintly. I didn't want to break an empire, I just wanted to stop being erased. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "And you did. You made them see you. The whole world sees you now." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of spring. For the first time, I felt light. Not because everything was perfect, but because I had survived. Because I had fought. Because I had refused to stay silent when silence would have been easier. That night before bed, I opened my grandfather's last letter again. The paper was worn from my hands, the ink faded, but the words still burned with truth. Strength is persistence. Strength is knowing who you are when the world tells you otherwise. I placed the letter on my nightstand, beside a framed photograph of him smiling in his garden, soil on his hands, sunlight on his face. And I whispered into the quiet room, a promise and a prayer. "I know who I am now. I am not their shadow. I am not their victim. I am Summer Chavez, and I am free." The storm was over. The house of lies had fallen, and for the first time in my life, the future was mine.